Hello and welcome back to my AuthorTube channel. I am Autumn Ashley and today we are going to be discussing my attack plan for draft 1 of my new project. We've done a lot of the legwork, we've done all of the outlining, world building, character development, character arcs, discovered what the main plot is, and we have some subplots. We're ready to rock and roll. I want to walk through what I'm going into writing this first draft thinking how I want to tackle this. It can change. It probably will change as I start to write and we get deeper into the story. Some things might change, other things might get completely thrown out the window, and new ideas and new ways of writing will probably unfold. This is, subject to change, but I always like to go into doing anything like outlining or drafting, having some type of idea of how I want to accomplish this. So I'm going to talk about how I plan on going about this first draft, taking all of the notes that I have been working so hard on for the last couple of weeks and try to turn that into a first draft. Before I do talk about what I want to do for the first draft, I had to sit back and think about where I wanted the finished product to be, something that eventually I would hand my beta readers, a good solid end goal for maybe draft 3 or 4, depending on how long it takes me to get to the final finished somewhat polished draft. It's a fantasy novel. I want it to be a standalone, and doing some research, I think a good solid end goal for a draft that I would like to be able to hand somebody to read, we're gonna try to go for, give or take some words, about 100,000 words. However, I know if I tell myself to sit down, draft 1 at 0 words, and get to 100,000 words, that ain't happening. There is no way in HE double hockey sticks that is going to happen. Even though I'm talking about word count and I don't really want to follow a whole word count type situation for the first draft, I'll get into that a little bit later. But having that as my end goal, I worked backwards. What I plan on doing for this first draft, since that's the end goal, but that's not going to be the goal for this draft. I'm sure you're confused now, but just hang with me. It will all eventually make sense. And even if it doesn't make sense, just hang with me anyways, because you might learn something. Other than that, I'm crazy and I don't know what I'm doing. The first draft for me is just telling myself the story. I am going to take my bullet point outline. I literally just want to expand on all of those points. As you can see in the outline that I'm showing here, there are some things that are color coded. I tried to color code them as a main plot and then all of the subplots that I have so far. But that does not mean that I have to strictly stick to this outline. There are a lot of parts, especially in Act 2, that are very vague statements, very vague bullet points. So I want to do the best that I possibly can with this first draft of following, but also at some points I'm going to allow myself to discovery write. The main focus, besides just telling myself the story, is focusing on that main plot. So telling myself what that main plot is, making sure I hit all of those ups and downs of the main plot. I also want to make sure I can weave in these subplots appropriately, make sure they make sense in the story, make sure I understand where I'm trying to go with those subplots. I also want to work on more character development. So character arcs, who are some of the other characters that might play a much bigger role in the story than I originally thought they would when I outlined. When I was developing and outlining the story, I did not expand a whole lot on the secondary characters or the side characters, because I feel like for me, if I do a character outline while I'm outlining the story before I've ever even drafted or played around with the characters, to me, I just feel like my characters just come out one-dimensional. They're very just like cardboard. I want to fully develop these characters as I write this first draft. So not only with this first draft am I going to be just telling myself the story, focusing on the main plot, some of those subplots, and the character development, but I really want to understand and play around with how the characters are going to interact with each other and then how they kind of shape and push the story. Even though I spent a lot of time outlining my main character, I feel like it was more important to hit some of the key things with her. I'm still going to discovery write her. I just know that not every character needed to be fully fleshed out before I started this first draft. It's a first draft. It's going to be messy. It's not going to make sense. And that's fine. That's how a first draft is supposed to be. The whole purpose of this is to tell myself the story and just get it written. And then we can build on it and we can get to the word count that I want, that final end product of 100,000 words. I want to work through the beginning. I have a lot of points already plotted out for the beginning of the story. So Act 1 is what I mean by the beginning of the story. In parts and places that I feel like I can really expand and dive pretty deep with, I want to take the time to do that. If it takes me a little bit longer to get through the first act because I have a lot of points that I would like to cover in the first act, I'm going to take all the time that I need, any amount of time to try and get as much information written out. Act 2 is a beast. Act 2, oh my gosh, there's a lot that's happening in Act 2. I only have a few bullet points for the main plots plotted out for the second act. My plan is to do as much work as I can for the first act and get it all nice and set up and ready to go. And then I think I might have to go back and outline a little bit, still staying in the first draft. So I think we're going to be bouncing back and forth from outlining, drafting, and then going back to outlining. And I think once I get closer to the second act and setting up first act going into the second act, I think once I'm there, I'll know a lot more things that I want to happen. For me, it's so hard to predict what I want to happen at the midpoint when I haven't exactly wrote anything quite yet about it. I have those 7 scenes that I've written, and I think that they're going to be great with helping me maneuver through the story, but a lot of those scenes I wrote before I started plotting, so a lot has kind of changed. They'll be good to go back to for inspiration, and they might spark something that maybe I was thinking when I was writing that scene for it to lead to. I will probably pause after writing the first act, do a little bit more outlining to prepare the second act, and then actually write the second act. That's probably how it's going to be with the ending too. The ending will probably end up changing from what I have already outlined it. I can already tell that it's changing. I wrote my ending first, which perfect. I loved that. I loved outlining the ending first because I knew where the story was going. The reason I think that the ending is already changing, well, the reason I think it has changed, I met with one of my critique partners and we talked about the whole story. Once I got to the ending, I felt like we had really ramped up the stakes and really talking about the story, that the ending that I had plotted out way before we had discovered all of this stuff, it almost felt like it didn't fit anymore. That might be something once I get closer to finishing Act 2, going into Act 3, we're probably going to go back to the outlining process and then home in the correct ending or a better ending to the first draft that I wrote. For each of my writing sessions for this first draft, I don't want to set a word count goal for each of those sessions. I want to set an intention before I start writing for a week or a couple of days or a writing vlog or something. I want to sit down and say, okay, well today I want to get through 1 or 2 points. There are these subplots that are happening. So I want to focus on the characters that are in this scene, the development that we have gotten to so far, and where I want those characters to go. So I think I've nailed everything with how I want to approach this. Right now, I have a little sheet that I wrote to myself. I'm going to just share. They're little tips and little things to keep in mind. I created this thinking about my past projects. I have 2 past projects. One of them is incomplete, it's shelved. The other one is a complete first draft. It's about 50,000 words. And then I also had a draft 0 for that project as well, which was also about 50,000 words. So taking from my past experiences, I created these tips for myself to help me stay on track and then to help me remember, hey, these were the mistakes that you made before. We need to make sure we don't make these mistakes again. Basically, I'm calling myself out on all my past mistakes. One thing that I had a difficulty with, and I feel like I am past this now, but one thing I did with one of my projects is I did not physically write in chronological order. That did not do well for the project, which is why it's incomplete and it's shelved. I always want to make sure I write in chronological order. There are going to be some scenes, some chapters as I'm writing this first draft that are going to be more beefy. I'm going to understand them a lot more than other chapters, other paragraphs, other scenes. I know the pacing is going to be off, but when I reach a scene or I reach a chapter or a paragraph or a bullet point that is on my outline and I'm not 100% sure quite where I want that scene to go, or I know just like a couple of sentences, I'm going to stop. I want to change it, maybe bold that and say, not sure what is going here, but this is what I want. And then do a couple of bullet points to say, I want these characters to interact. I need a description here of the setting, and I want to make sure that this subplot or this main plot has some type of coverage. And then we're going to move on to the next scene or the next chapter. And my point of doing that is so when I go back to read through everything before I'm going to start the second draft, I will at least know, okay, I didn't know what I wanted to put here. Here's a few points that maybe I wanted to touch on. So when I go back to the second draft, I can try to figure out, or maybe I'll have a clearer picture of where I want that scene to go. And then I'll try to write that scene as much as I can, or maybe add a little bit more to that scene, and maybe not so much do bullet points as I would then, but then just maybe turn it into a paragraph, or maybe I'll be able to write the full scene. But the whole point of that is to not just give myself a vague, be like, LOL, I'm stupid and I didn't know what to put here, but we'll figure it out later. That's something that I'm learning from a past autumn mistake that I do not want to make while I'm writing this draft. So I already have a note in here to myself saying that I know that the second act is going to be a beast. This is just a reminder to myself to say it's okay to only write what I know for the second act. It's also going to be okay to discovery write. However, it is not okay to discovery write and not use Brandon Sanderson's notes for this. His lectures, amazing. I have been talking about them for the last 4 vlogs, I think. So Brandon Sanderson, in one of his lectures talking about plotting, he mentioned discovery plotting. I think that's what he called it, but discovery drafting. If I decide that I want to discovery draft something in the story, I am going to use the format that he told us about, which is the yes, but no, and I'm not going to go into what that actually is, but I think you can kind of figure it out. If I discovery write, that's how I want to discovery write that chapter, that scene, or maybe those couple of paragraphs just to get us back on track. It's okay to discovery draft. If I feel like going back to the outline is not needed, we can just use that format to discovery plot the next point that I have in the story. One other thing I want to remind myself, it's okay to go as far as I think I can until I reach uncharted waters. I can circle back to my outline and develop the story a little bit more. I talked about this earlier, where maybe going from act 1 to act 2, I might need to do more plotting before we proceed into act 2. Once I reach that point where I'm like, okay, I think now in order to keep the story consistent and to not do so much work later, let's go ahead and pause, do some more outlining, and then we will head back into drafting. When I did my deadline for the outlining, I feel like that was very well, especially since when I set this deadline for myself, it was a very loose deadline. So I knew going into it a couple of days before, a couple of days after, or even a week later if I wasn't quite able to finish it on time, basically. But the whole point of the deadline is to just make sure that we keep moving forward. I have set another deadline for draft 1, not completing draft 1, but what I really want to focus on with this deadline is trying to get as much written about the story and understanding as much about the story as I possibly can. The next deadline that I have is going to be May 18th. It's fairly close. It's in almost a month. Once I hit this deadline, I want to spend a couple of weeks going back and just rereading everything that I wrote about the story. I think it's going to be a good try, especially since I did so well with the first deadline. We're going to try it again. Maybe I should have talked about this earlier when I said that for the first draft, we're not going to necessarily be worrying about word counts, which we're not for the first draft. Instead of doing the word counts, I want to do tracking my writing again. And what I mean by tracking my writing, I have a sheet of paper. It's actually a little sticky note, and it has all the dates from when I started the first draft, which was April 14th, all the way to May 18th. And so I have little bullet points where I can color in the box. I will either circle in or color in the square green or red. And that just means I wrote that day or I didn't write that day. That's all I'm keeping track of. That's going to be it for this video. You guys, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed it, please go on to give it a thumbs up. And if you're not subscribed to my channel and you want to be part of my writing journey, hit that big red subscribe button, and I will see you guys in the next video. Bye.